Now to oil, hovering near its low of the year. WTI down nearly 5% this week and now up just 2% since January. Brent falling more than 3% this week, and yesterday it actually closed negative on the year. Earlier, the chartmaster, Carton Braxton Worth, put out a note saying he believes crude is going to continue to head lower from here. The chart that is showing what he calls a long downward trajectory is what he's pointing to. Here now to take us inside the crude complex is CNBC contributor Helima Croft, who's RBC's global head of commodity strategy. She's in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, site of the Fed summit. So, Helima, do you expect oil to keep falling from here?
I think the key thing to watch, Sarah, is really what happens with, concerns over Chinese demand. Chinese demand concerns have really weighed on this market, as well as, broader concerns about the macro outlook. So hence, everyone's going to be watching what happens with the Fed. One thing that really is not factoring into oil prices right now is geopolitical risk. That has really evaporated from the market. There had been, some speculation, over the past couple weeks that we would see some type of Iranian and Hezbollah response to the Israeli assassinations, but that has not materialized yet. So I think the market is really refocused on these demand concerns, and key things to watch is really what happens with OPEC in the coming weeks. Do they start bringing barrels back? Do they take a pause on adding barrels into this market? But right now, it's really has been a focus on demand concerns.
Helima, it's Tim. Thanks for joining us. I would argue that oil prices have been remarkably stable over the last 2 years. Chartists can look at some things. Carter does great work. But I actually think it's been an extraordinary quiet period for oil price volatility. Can you talk about that? And is OPEC really been in control? Because between geopolitics, Fed uncertainty, and we know OPEC's focused on that, oil prices, I think, have been in a very tight band.
Well, I think OPEC has been, and I would actually, when I talk about OPEC, I would say Saudi Arabia in particular has been, remarkably disciplined. And you bring up the Fed rate policy. One of the reasons why the Saudis in June said that they were not, adding barrels back now, even though people had more robust demand forecast, was uncertainty over the trajectory of rate policy. The Saudis have been really cautious about they've been really wanting to avoid oversupplying the market. And even in June, when we had that sort of taper tantrum, when everyone got very freaked out, when they came out with the unwind schedule for their voluntary cuts, the Saudis came out and said, look, we're going to be very judicious about how we add barrels back. So if we get clear indications that the market cannot absorb additional barrels, we're not going to put barrels on the market. And that is a contrast, frankly, to what we saw in 2015, when they basically were full steam ahead with a market share war. We don't have that policy now in place. So even if they were to add, several 100,000 barrels back into the market, if the market couldn't take that, I think that we'd see a reversal of policy. So I think the Saudis have been very, very cautious about how they've conducted oil policy.
Helima, over the last year or so, a lot of M&A in the space. Warren Buffett owns, I think, 30% of Oxy now. I'm not asking about individual names, but why can't the energy patch, which valuations you can make a compelling case, they're better run than they've probably ever been before. Why can't the stocks get out of their own way here, you think?
Well, as you said, I don't cover stocks in particular, but, one of the things when we talk about with M&A, I think it's a really interesting question about the resilience of U.S. production. U.S. production, 13.4 million barrels. And there had been some question about if you had more M&A, would you see more restrained U.S. production? But essentially now is M&A driving efficiency in the sector, and is that contributing to these, elevated U.S. production numbers? The U.S. story has been remarkably resilient.
Is there an election play here, Helima? Both candidates speak about energy very differently.
Well, this is interesting, Sarah, because, candidates speak one way on the election trail, but then when they have to govern differently, when they sort of get mugged by reality, look at how the Biden administration really pivoted on energy policy. Certainly Kamala Harris ran to the left of President Biden. She'd called initially for a fracking ban. When she was Attorney General, she had sued the Obama Interior Department to stop offshore fracking. But she is really now sort of pivoted back to the center. She's walked back the fracking ban. You don't actually hear a lot of conversation at this point about climate policy from the Harris campaign. So I think they're very focused on winning a very important state, which is Pennsylvania. And if you want to win Pennsylvania, it's really hard to win with an anti-fracking position with that state.